Ensign George Gay was 25 years old. He had a life vest, a rubber seat cushion, and a hole in his left leg where a Zero's bullet had gone through. For the next 14 hours, he floated alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and watched the greatest naval battle of the 20th century happen directly over his head. Every man he had eaten breakfast with that morning was dead. He did not know it yet, but he was about to become the only survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8 and the only American who would ever watch the Battle of Midway with his own eyes from the water from beginning to end. This is the story of the 6 minutes that broke the empire of Japan. 4:30 in the morning, June 4th, 1942. The Pacific Ocean, 240 miles northwest of Midway Island. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi and watched his pilots run to their aircraft. He was 55 years old. Beneath his feet was the finest carrier fleet ever assembled. 4 fleet carriers, 248 aircraft, air crews that had shattered Pearl Harbor and Darwin and Ceylon and never lost a battle. In 6 hours, 3 of those 4 carriers would be blazing wrecks. Nagumo did not know that yet. He gave the order to launch. 6 months earlier, on a Sunday morning in December, 353 Japanese planes had ripped Pearl Harbor open. 18 American warships smashed. More than 3,500 killed or wounded in less than 2 hours. The most devastating surprise attack in the history of naval warfare, and a failure. The 3 United States aircraft carriers that Japan had come to kill were not in the harbor that morning. Enterprise was at sea. Lexington was at sea. Saratoga was in San Diego. Every American battleship had burned. Every American carrier had survived. One man understood exactly what that meant. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, was 58 years old. He had studied at Harvard. He had lived in Washington. He had walked through the steel mills of Pennsylvania and the assembly plants of Detroit. He knew what American industry could do when it was angry, and he had just made it angry without finishing the job. For 4 months after Pearl Harbor, nothing stopped Japan. The Philippines fell, Singapore fell, Wake Island, Guam, Hong Kong, Malaya, Java. In February, Japanese carrier planes bombed Australia. In April, they ranged into the Indian Ocean and sank a British aircraft carrier. Then, on April 18th, 16 twin-engined bombers appeared in the sky over Tokyo. They were United States Army Air Force's B-25 Mitchells. They had taken off from the deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet, 650 miles from the Japanese coast. They dropped their bombs in daylight. They flew on toward mainland China. The damage on the ground was minor. The damage in the Japanese High Command was catastrophic. For the first time in 700 years, an enemy had struck the home islands. The emperor was not safe. The empire was not sealed. Yamamoto understood, more clearly than anyone in Tokyo, what had to happen next. The American carriers had to die. He chose Midway, 2 flat coral specks in the middle of nowhere. An airstrip, a garrison of United States Marines, 1,136 miles from Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto did not want the island. He wanted the trap. If Japan attacked Midway, the Americans would have to come out and fight. When they did, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers would be waiting in ambush. The plan was called Operation MI, Almost 200 warships across the northern Pacific, a diversionary strike against the Aleutian Islands, submarine picket lines around Hawaii. And at the center of everything, Nagumo's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. There was only one flaw in the plan. 2,000 miles east of Yamamoto's flagship, in a concrete basement beneath the 14th Naval District Administration Building at Pearl Harbor, a 42-year-old Navy commander was reading his mail. The room was called the dungeon. There were no windows. The bulbs hung bare from the ceiling. The concrete floor stayed cold, even in the Hawaiian summer. Commander Joseph Rochefort worked in a red velvet smoking jacket and carpet slippers because he could not stand the cold on his feet. He was thin. He had not shaved in days. He slept on a cot in his office when he slept at all. He led a team of cryptanalysts, radio operators, and traffic analysts called Station Hypo, and for 5 months he had been tearing apart the Japanese naval code known as JN-25. Nobody had broken JN-25, not completely, only fragments could be read. But Rochefort and his men had learned to read the fragments in patterns, and by early May, the pattern had a name, AF. AF was the target of the next great Japanese operation. Rochefort was certain AF was Midway. In Washington, Admiral Ernest King disagreed. The Office of Naval Intelligence disagreed. Some believed AF was Hawaii. Some believed it was the west coast of the United States. They dismissed the man in the basement. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, was 57 years old. He was calm. He was quiet. He had inherited a fleet on fire the morning after Pearl Harbor and had rebuilt it in 5 months. He believed Rochefort. But belief was not proof. The proof came from a lieutenant commander named Wilfred Jasper Holmes, also 42, working alongside Rochefort in the dungeon. Holmes proposed something so simple it almost sounded like a schoolboy prank. Midway Island would send a message, in plain English, over an open radio channel, reporting that its freshwater distillation plant had broken down. The message went out on May 19th. 2 days later, an intercepted Japanese naval dispatch was decrypted at Pearl Harbor, coded, buried in routine traffic. 6 words. AF is short of fresh water. The trap had a mouth, and now Nimitz could see it. He had 4 carriers left in the Pacific. Saratoga was under repair. Wasp was in the Atlantic. That left Enterprise. That left Hornet. And that left Yorktown. 3 weeks earlier, in the Coral Sea, Yorktown had fought the first carrier versus carrier battle in history. 2 Japanese fleet carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, against the American carriers Yorktown and Lexington. Both sides lost a ship. The Americans lost Lexington. The Japanese lost the light carrier Shoho. Both sides withdrew. The Japanese made a mistake. They believed Yorktown was dead. She was not dead. On the morning of May 27th, she limped into Pearl Harbor trailing an oil slick 10 miles long. Her flight deck was cratered. Her hangar deck was scorched black. Her boilers were half destroyed. The yard engineers walked her decks with clipboards and estimated 90 days to make her fit for battle. Nimitz gave them 72 hours. For 3 days and 3 nights, more than 1,400 civilian workers swarmed over Yorktown. Welders' torches burned around the clock. The dry dock lights never went out. Steel was cut and steel was laid. Wiring was ripped out and wiring was strung. Bulkheads were patched. Boilers were rebuilt. Aircraft were craned aboard, while the deck below them still glowed. Yorktown sailed on May 30th. Some of the dockyard workers were still on her. They had not finished. They rowed her to sea in overalls and welders' masks and were taken off by a homeward-bound destroyer with wrenches still in their hands. The Japanese did not know Yorktown was coming. The Japanese did not know that Shokaku and Zuikaku would not be with Nagumo. The Japanese did not know that Rochefort had read the code. 3 American aircraft carriers were already at sea, running dark, headed for a spot Nimitz had marked on the map 325 miles northeast of Midway. He had named it Point Luck. On the hangar deck of the aircraft carrier Hornet, a 41-year-old lieutenant commander walked among his pilots and made ready for something he already knew he would not survive. His name was John Charles Waldron. He was part Lakota Sioux, born in Fort Pierre, South Dakota. He commanded Torpedo Squadron 8. His squadron flew the Douglas TBD Devastator, an aircraft designed in 1934, obsolete by 1940, and now, in 1942, a coffin with wings. It could barely make 180 miles per hour with a torpedo hanging beneath it. Its Mark 13 torpedoes ran deep, ran erratic, and often failed to explode. Waldron knew this. He had said so in writing to his superiors. Nothing had changed. The night before the squadron sailed, he wrote a letter to his men and read it aloud in the ready room. If there is only one plane left to make a final run-in, I want that man to go in and get a hit. 29 of the 30 men in Torpedo Squadron 8 would not come home. But that was still 4 days away. On the last night of May, 3 American aircraft carriers slipped out of Pearl Harbor under radio silence and steered north into empty water. 2,000 miles to the west, aboard the battleship Yamato, Admiral Yamamoto ate a quiet supper and reviewed the disposition of his fleet. On the bridge of Akagi, Chuichi Nagumo studied his weather reports and slept well. In the basement at Pearl Harbor, Joseph Rochefort had not slept in 3 days, and on the hangar deck of Hornet, John Waldron rested his hand on the cold aluminum flank of a Devastator, listened to the sea against the hull, and waited for the morning of June 4th. The morning of June 3rd began with the drone of an engine over an empty sea. Ensign Jack Reed, 27 years old, flew a PBY Catalina flying boat out of Midway Island. He had been in the air for 9 hours. His fuel was running low. His eyes ached from staring at gray water under a gray sky. And at 9:04 in the morning, 700 miles west of Midway, he saw them. Ships. A great many ships. He pushed the intercom button and said, "Do you see what I see?" His co-pilot said, "You're damned right I do." They circled at the edge of visual range for as long as their fuel allowed. Then Reed radioed Midway. Main body. Bearing 262. Distance 700 miles. Course 090. Speed 19 knots. What Reed had spotted was not the main body. It was the Japanese invasion transport group. Nagumo's 4 carriers were still north, still hidden, still coming. But for the first time in the war, an American pilot had opened his eyes and found the Empire waiting in the water below him. At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz read the sighting report and nodded. The trap was closing. It was closing on the wrong end. But it was closing. He signaled his commanders at sea. That is not, repeat not, the enemy's striking force. That is the landing force. The striking force will hit from the northwest at daylight tomorrow. Aboard the Yorktown, Rear Admiral Frank Fletcher, 57 years old, read the signal. Aboard the Enterprise, Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, 55, read it too. Both men understood. They set their course southwest. Point Luck was behind them now. The battle was ahead. 400 miles to the northwest, Chuichi Nagumo did not know that anyone had seen anything. His carriers ran east at 24 knots through the thickening dark. His pilots slept in their bunks or drank tea in the ready rooms. On the flight decks, ordnance crews wrestled bombs and torpedoes into place beneath the wings of Val dive bombers and Kate torpedo planes. The night was cold. The sea was black. The confidence of the Imperial Japanese Navy was absolute. At 4:30 in the morning of June 4th, 108 aircraft roared off the 4 Japanese carriers and turned toward Midway. Nagumo held back another 108. He kept those in reserve, armed with armor-piercing bombs and Type 91 aerial torpedoes designed to kill ships. He did not expect to find American ships. He expected to find nothing. But he was a careful man, and he kept the reserve armed for the sea. He then ordered 7 reconnaissance aircraft into the sky to search the ocean around him. 7 aircraft sent late to cover a vast crescent of empty water. One of those 7 aircraft flew from the heavy cruiser Tone. The Tone catapult jammed. The launch was delayed by 30 minutes. 30 minutes. That is where the battle turned. At 5:34, a Midway-based Catalina spotted the incoming Japanese strike wave. At 5:45, another Catalina spotted the Japanese carriers themselves. At 6:03, radar on Midway picked up the approaching swarm. The island's fighters scrambled. Its bombers were sent into the sky to attack the Japanese fleet. The fighters were mostly obsolete Brewster Buffaloes. They were slaughtered. 15 were shot down. 10 more were damaged beyond repair. Of the 25 Marine pilots who took off from Midway that morning, 14 never landed again. The Japanese strike wave pounded Midway. Oil tanks exploded on Sand Island. Hangars burned on Eastern Island. Every American aircraft that could fly was already gone. When the Japanese strike leader turned for home, he sent a radio message back to Nagumo. There is need for a second attack. Nagumo weighed the message. The runway on Midway was still open. The island was still armed. His pilots would have to go back and finish the job. He gave the order. The 108 aircraft of his reserve strike force were still on the hangar decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. They were armed with anti-ship weapons, heavy armor-piercing bombs, and Type 91 aerial torpedoes. Nagumo ordered them rearmed with fragmentation and general-purpose bombs for a second strike against the island. On 4 hangar decks, hundreds of ordnance crewmen began the exhausting work of unbolting torpedoes and heavy bombs from the underbellies of Kates and Vals, wheeling them into corners of the hangars, and hoisting land attack bombs up in their place. The safe procedure was to strike the removed ordnance down into the armored magazines below. There was no time for the safe procedure. Torpedoes were laid on the deck. Bombs were stacked against bulkheads. Fuel lines snaked between them. Aircraft sat with their tanks half full and their bomb bays open. 4 hangar decks became 4 floating powder magazines. Then, the reconnaissance plane from the cruiser Tone finally reached its search line. At 7:28 in the morning, its pilot broke radio silence. Sight what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships in position bearing 10 degrees, distance 240 miles from Midway. Course 150, speed more than 20 knots. Nagumo read the message and his stomach turned to ice. 10 enemy ships, 240 miles away. Bearing that made no sense unless the Americans had been at sea for days, and no mention of carriers, no mention of the one thing he needed to know. He signaled the tone floatplane, advised ship types, 15. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. At 8:09, the answer came. Enemy ships are 5 cruisers and 5 destroyers. Nagumo exhaled. Cruisers and destroyers were dangerous. Cruisers and destroyers were not what would sink his fleet. He returned to the second Midway strike. He ordered the rearming to continue. 20 minutes later, the tone pilot came back on the air. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be one aircraft carrier. One aircraft carrier. Nagumo froze on the bridge of Akagi. His staff froze around him. Below in the hangars, ordnance men were still swapping bombs for the wrong target. Above the ocean, 108 American aircraft from Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown were already in the air and looking for him. Nagumo made a decision that would haunt Japan for 100 years. He reversed the rearming order. He commanded his ordnance crews to stop pulling torpedoes. He commanded them to put the torpedoes back. He commanded them to hoist the anti-ship weapons back into the aircraft that would attack the American carrier. And he continued to hold his aircraft below decks because the returning Midway strike wave was low on fuel and needed to land, and he would not launch an incomplete strike without fighter escort. For the next hour, chaos ruled the hangar decks of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Bombs sat next to torpedoes. Torpedoes sat next to bombs. Fuel hoses were dragged out again. Half-fueled aircraft were pushed aside. Ordnance was heaped in corners, in violation of every regulation the Japanese Navy had ever written. And in the sky north and east of the 4 carriers, John Waldron was flying south by dead reckoning, and he was flying straight toward them. Torpedo Squadron 8 had launched from Hornet at 7:06 that morning. 15 Devastators. Waldron leading. The strike commander from Hornet's Air Group, Lieutenant Commander Stanhope Ring, had ordered the group onto a course that Waldron believed was wrong. Waldron had argued. Ring had refused. Waldron had broken formation. He turned Torpedo Squadron 8 south, alone, without fighter cover. He was right. At 9:20 in the morning, Waldron sighted the Japanese carrier fleet through broken clouds. He ordered his squadron into attack formation. He led them down. The Zeros of the Japanese Combat Air Patrol saw the 15 slow, low-flying Devastators and fell on them like wolves. The first Devastator burst into flame at 4,000 feet. The second went into the sea before it could drop its torpedo. Then the third, then the fourth, then all of them. Not one American torpedo hit a Japanese ship. Not one Devastator returned. 29 of the 30 men in Torpedo Squadron 8 were killed. Only one survived. Ensign George Gay, 25 years old, was shot down after launching his torpedo. He crawled out of the wreckage of his cockpit as it sank, unfolded a rubber seat cushion for a raft, and hid beneath it while the sea around him burned. He watched the rest of the battle from the water. At 9:40 in the morning, 14 Devastators of Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise came in behind Waldron. 10 were shot down. At 10:15, 12 devastators of Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown came in from the southeast. 10 of those were shot down as well. For 55 minutes, 3 American torpedo squadrons had bled out one by one over the same patch of ocean. Of 41 American torpedo planes that attacked the Japanese fleet that morning, 35 were destroyed. Not a single torpedo found its target. They died for nothing. They died for everything, because every Zero of the Japanese combat air patrol was now down at wave-top height, chasing torpedo planes. The sky at 20,000 feet above Nagumo's 4 carriers was empty, and 49 miles to the east, 33 SBD Dauntless dive bombers of Bombing Squadron 6 and Scouting Squadron 6 were running out of fuel. Their commander was Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey. He was 40 years old. He was from Buffalo, New York. He led the Enterprise Air Group. He had been searching the ocean for 2 hours for a Japanese fleet that was supposed to be exactly where it wasn't. His fuel gauges were failing him. His pilots were checking their tanks. If he did not find the enemy in the next few minutes, he would have to turn back. If he turned back, the day was lost. He looked down at the ocean, and he saw a single Japanese destroyer, alone, running northeast at flank speed, throwing a long white wake across the blue. He did not know it was the Arashi. He did not know she had been dropping depth charges on the American submarine Nautilus. He did not know she was hurrying to catch up with the main fleet. He guessed. He followed her wake. At 10:05 in the morning of June 4th, 1942, Wade McCluskey's dive bombers reached the end of the wake and looked down at what lay beneath the clouds. 4 aircraft carriers, 2 fleet destroyers, 2 battleships, a ring of cruisers. Every one of them turned into the wind. Every one of them helpless from above. And in the same minute, from the southeast, 17 Dauntlesses of Bombing Squadron 3 from Yorktown, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, 39 years old, arrived at exactly the same altitude, over exactly the same target, from exactly the opposite direction. By pure accident of geometry, 2 American strike groups had arrived simultaneously, unnoticed 20,000 feet above 4 Japanese aircraft carriers whose fighters were still down on the deck killing torpedo planes. McCluskey spoke into his radio. Attack! 2 enemy carriers. He rolled his Dauntless onto its back and pushed it into a dive. The time was 10:22 in the morning. For 6 minutes, the Pacific War would hang in the air with him. 10:22 in the morning. Wade McCluskey rolled the Enterprise Air Group into its dive and gave an order that almost lost the battle. He was looking down at 2 Japanese aircraft carriers directly beneath him. Kaga to the south, Akagi to the north. Doctrine said, the leader takes the far carrier, the trailing squadron takes the near one. McCluskey said the opposite. He ordered both Bombing 6 and Scouting 6 to attack the same ship. He ordered them all onto Kaga. Akagi, the flagship of the entire Kido Butai, was about to be left alone. In the sky above Bombing 6, Lieutenant Richard Best, 32 years old, heard McCluskey's order and knew instantly that it was wrong. Best was already committed to his dive. His wingmen were on him. Behind and above, Scouting 6 was already rolling in on Kaga. If everyone attacked Kaga, Akagi would escape untouched, launch her reserve strike, and finish Yorktown before sundown. Best pulled his Dauntless out of its dive at 10,000 feet. He was the only man in the American Air Group who did it. His wingmen followed him because he was their leader. 2 other pilots followed him because they trusted him. That was it. 3 SBD Dauntless dive bombers out of 33 broke off from Kaga and turned toward Akagi. 3 planes to kill a flagship. At 10:24, the first bomb hit Kaga. It struck her flight deck aft, punched through into the hangar, and detonated among the parked aircraft still being rearmed. The second bomb hit near the forward elevator. The third exploded in the middle of the flight deck amid a cluster of fully fueled planes. The fourth bomb slammed into the bridge and killed the captain, the executive officer, and every man on the command deck. Kaga became a torch. At 10:25, Richard Best released his bomb on Akagi, a single 1,000-pound bomb. It struck the aft edge of the amidships elevator. It fell through into the upper hangar deck, and it exploded in a compartment stacked chin-high with unstowed torpedoes, unstowed bombs, and half-fueled aircraft. The hangar of Akagi did not simply catch fire, it detonated. Chuichi Nagumo was on the bridge. His staff pulled him out through a window. He climbed hand over hand down a rope onto the deck of a light cruiser. He watched his flagship burn from a mile away and said almost nothing for the rest of the morning. At 10:26, 17 Dauntlesses of Bombing Squadron 3 from Yorktown arrived over Soryu from the opposite quarter. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie led them down. 3 bombs struck Soryu in 20 seconds. 1 tore open her forward flight deck. 1 burst inside the hangar. 1 went off in the engineering spaces. Soryu's boilers ruptured. Her power died. Her fires spread faster than her damage control parties could reach them. 6 minutes. From 10:22 to 10:28. 3 Japanese fleet carriers on fire. The most experienced carrier strike force in the world crippled beyond repair. And the Japanese Empire, which had ruled the Pacific for 6 months, was already dead. It just did not know it yet. 1 Japanese carrier remained. Hiryu. Her commander was Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, 49 years old. Yamaguchi was the finest carrier tactician the Imperial Japanese Navy had produced. He had studied at Princeton University from 1921 to 1923. He had served as Assistant Naval Attaché in Washington. He understood carrier warfare in a way that Nagumo never had. And he understood, watching the smoke rise from 3 of the 4 ships in his command, that if Hiryu did not strike back within the hour, everything was lost. At 10:57 in the morning, 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters roared off Hiryu's flight deck under the command of Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi. Yorktown detected them on radar at 11:59. Combat Air Patrol Wildcats climbed to meet them. The Zeros closed in. In a swirling fight above the fleet, Wildcats and Zeros tore into each other while the 18 Vals broke through and dove on Yorktown. Anti-aircraft fire from the Yorktown screen ripped 7 Vals apart before they could release. 3 bombs got through. The first bomb hit Yorktown's flight deck near number 2 elevator and punched a hole into the hangar. The second penetrated the smokestack and knocked out 5 of Yorktown's 6 boilers. The third exploded 4 decks down near the forward gasoline storage. Fires bloomed in the interior. Yorktown coasted to a dead stop, drifting on the swell. For a moment, it looked like the Japanese had done it. Then something happened that Kobayashi's surviving pilots could not have predicted. The damage control parties of Yorktown, who had spent 72 hours training in Pearl Harbor because their ship was supposed to be dead, went to work. They had drilled these exact fires. They had drilled these exact fuel line ruptures. They knew Yorktown the way a man knows the house he grew up in. In 90 minutes, they had the fires out. In another 30 minutes, they had 4 boilers back online. By 1:30 in the afternoon, Yorktown was steaming again at 20 knots. Her deck was patched, her radar was up, her guns were manned. A destroyer was refueling her combat air patrol Wildcats from her own tanks. She looked, from the air, like an aircraft carrier that had never been touched. At 1:31 in the afternoon, Hiryu launched her second strike. 10 Kate torpedo bombers, 6 Zero fighters, under the command of Lieutenant Yoichi Tomonaga. Tomonaga's own left-wing tank was leaking. He had been told his aircraft could not make the return trip. He took off anyway. He had a wife and a daughter waiting for him in Japan. He knew he would never see either of them again. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Tomonaga's strike found Yorktown, but Tomonaga's pilots did not know they had found Yorktown. They looked down at a carrier moving at 20 knots, deck intact, no smoke, no fires, no damage. They thought they had found the second American carrier. They thought Kobayashi's strike had sunk the first one. They thought they had a fresh target. 4 Kates broke through the Wildcats and the anti-aircraft fire. 2 torpedoes struck Yorktown on the port side within 30 seconds of each other. She heeled over immediately. Her rudder jammed. Her power died again. She lay listing at 26 degrees, dead in the water. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship. When Tomonaga's surviving pilots landed back aboard Hiryu, they reported that they had sunk the second American carrier of the day. Yamaguchi radioed Yamamoto. 2 American carriers sunk. The balance restored. They had struck the same ship twice. At 5:05 in the afternoon, 41 Dauntlesses from Enterprise found Hiryu. Many of the pilots were from Yorktown's air group. Their carrier was crippled behind them. Their friends were dead in the water, off the horizon. They came out of the sun. 4 bombs hit Hiryu in the space of 30 seconds. Her forward elevator blew clear off its hinges and slammed against the bridge. Her hangar exploded. Her flight deck became a pit of fire. By nightfall, Hiryu was drifting, burning from bow to stern, and Yamaguchi knew the fight was over. Just after midnight, on June 5th, Yamaguchi called what was left of Hiryu's crew to the flight deck. About 800 men gathered in the smoke and the dark. He led them in 3 shouts of banzai for the Emperor. He gave a small ration of ship's biscuit and 1 final ration of water to each man. He took off his admiral's cap and handed it to his flag lieutenant. He asked him to carry it home to his family. Then he and Captain Tomeo Kaku, 48 years old, the man who had commanded Hiryu since her commissioning, walked back to the bridge. They lashed themselves to the pillars. They ordered the destroyer Makigumo to scuttle Hiryu with torpedoes and take off her survivors. Hiryu went down at dawn on June 5th. Yamaguchi went down with her. The Imperial Japanese Navy would not find another carrier commander of his caliber for the rest of the war. Aboard the battleship Yamato, Isoroku Yamamoto received the reports through the night in silence. Kaga, sunk. Soryu, sunk. Akagi, scuttled. Hiryu, gone. Every carrier of the strike force more than 3,000 men, every reason for the Midway operation to exist. At 2:55 in the morning of June 5th, Yamamoto issued a general recall. Operation MI was over. The combined fleet turned west and ran for home. Yorktown did not die that day. Her crew went back aboard on June 6th to try to save her. They had almost done it when the Japanese submarine I-168 slipped inside her destroyer screen and put 2 torpedoes into her side and 1 into the destroyer Hammond. Hammond broke in half in 3 minutes. Yorktown rolled over and sank at dawn on June 7th. The final count was terrible. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and 3,057 men, including approximately 110 irreplaceable combat aviators. The pilots who had shattered Pearl Harbor, the pilots who had swept the Indian Ocean. The core of Japan's naval air power was gone in a single day. The United States lost the carrier Yorktown, the destroyer Hammond, 144 aircraft, and 307 men. The battle had been decided by tiny things. A jammed catapult on the cruiser Tone, a 30-minute delay in a search plane's launch, a torpedo squadron leader who trusted his own instincts against orders, 100 torpedo bombers who died for nothing and everything, a dive bomber leader who followed the wake of a lone destroyer because his fuel gauge left him no choice, a junior lieutenant named Richard Best who broke off a botched attack and saved the Pacific with 3 airplanes. Chuichi Nagumo survived Midway. 2 years later, on Saipan, he shot himself in a cave. Isoroku Yamamoto survived Midway. 10 months later, American P-38 Lightnings shot down his transport plane over Bougainville. He was killed by naval intelligence he himself had never respected. Joseph Rochefort survived Midway. Washington, embarrassed that a man in a basement had been right when they had been wrong, transferred him out of intelligence work and sent him to command a floating dry dock in San Francisco. He was not decorated for Midway during his lifetime. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously in 1986. John Waldron did not survive Midway. Neither did 28 of his men. George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, was picked up by a Catalina the next day. He lived until 1994. Wade McCluskey lived until 1976. Richard Best flew one more mission on the afternoon of June 4th, activated a latent case of tuberculosis from a faulty oxygen system, and never flew for the Navy again. He was 32 years old at Midway. He died in 2001. For the rest of the war, Japan built new carriers, trained new pilots, launched new operations. None of it mattered. The men who could have led those carriers were gone. The pilots who could have trained those pilots were gone. The industrial gap between the United States and Japan was never going to close. And after June 4th, 1942, there was no longer any Japanese naval force capable of forcing the Americans back. 6 minutes. 6 minutes on a sunny morning in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. 3 Japanese carriers turned into scrap. A 4th destroyed by nightfall. An empire that had ruled from Hawaii to Ceylon, suddenly bleeding out from a wound it could not close. The men who won it did not think they had won anything at the time. They thought they had lost. They thought they had failed. They thought their friends had died for nothing. They were wrong. They were the men who broke the empire of the sun.